As a contractor, have you ever felt frustrated by the inability to be able to grow your business beyond a certain level? And have you wondered what the secret is to making a consistent profit on the bottom line while you're also trying to grow and increase your revenue? If so, I'm really excited to have you listen to today's video, which is an interview I did with my client, Aaron Gordon. And we're going to talk about Aaron's journey of growing his contracting business and how he became successful. And what were some of the key things that he did that helped him along the way be able to build a stronger bottom line as well as grow his revenue and build a reputation in the industry where he is very well respected. Hi, I'm Vicki Suter with Suter Business Builders, and for over 25 years, I've been helping contractors build more sustainably profitable and successful businesses. And I'm very excited to share with you today this interview with Aaron. So let's go ahead and jump in. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Profit Builder. I am super excited to have my guest, Aaron Gordon, here with AGC today. Aaron is a general contractor in the Bay Area, California, Northern California. And Aaron and I have worked together for over 10 years. And I just have a lot of respect and appreciation for how he has grown his contracting business over these years. And I asked him to be a guest today because I wanted him to share with you some of the things that he has found over the years have really helped him in terms of growing his business, that I just felt like that would really help you as a contractor get some ideas about what might be helpful to you as you look to grow your contracting business. So Aaron, thank you so much for being a guest on The Profit Builder. I appreciate you being here. Would you just introduce yourself, tell people a little bit about your business, and then we'll jump in, and I'm going to just kind of grill you with the questions that we came up with, and we'll see where the conversation goes.
Okay, I'm Aaron Gordon with Aaron Gordon Construction. Been in business since about 2000, so roughly 22 years now. Started as a handyman and never really looked back. Now I've got 35 employees and based out of San Francisco doing high-end residential construction, and feel like we have a pretty good name in the industry, and things are good.
When you and I first met, you weren't doing projects the size that you are, and you weren't doing, your business wasn't quite the size that it, anywhere close to the size that it is now, right? As you said, you started out as a handyman, and we met somewhere in the middle of all of that in I think it was 2012, 2013. I'm going to ask you, you've been on this journey for over 20 years. What do you see is the secret to being successful as a contractor?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think common sense is one factor that general contractors need to be successful, in the ability to look at situations in a non-emotional way and solve problems. So the common sense is certainly one of them. And as I was thinking about this question, I think the having an unwillingness to fail attitude, being a general contractor is a tough business, and learning how to be a general contractor is the hardest part. Going out and building stuff is the easy part, but estimating and having systems in place and dealing with tough clients and tough projects and architects and designers, and being able to, get through that tough time to where you're learning how to do all of those things at the same time while not failing is something that's really important. And over the years, I never accepted failure, and when times get tough, you gotta just go at it. So I think that's one of the most important things. And then also an unwillingness to be over budget on projects. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, but I'm at a point in my career where I won't accept projects being over budget and not running properly. It's just something that, when I was younger, sometimes some jobs you make money on, some jobs you weren't, and it kind of balanced at the end. And now, in my career. That's not something I'm willing to allow in the company. It's something that I talk about a lot, and everybody in the company understands that every job's got to be on time, on budget, with a happy client. That's easy to say. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
talking about that with you for 10 years, and we all know being on time and on budget with a happy client's the goal, but it's not an easy thing to accomplish as you're growing your business and learning your systems.
So let me ask you this question because, I think I love what you just said. There's a number of things that you just spoke to, which is one, realizing that being great at a trade does not necessarily equate to being great as a contractor and running a business. So there's all these other hats that you have to wear. And the second key thing I heard was it's not just about working harder, it's working smarter. And can you just speak to the piece about being relentless about not letting projects go over budget? So,
Mm-hmm.
what's your secret to doing that? What's the thing that you do that you see as really the critical element that lets you do that?
Um, I think the most important factor is setting your site super and PM up for success. Let's take, for example, a situation where you've underbid the job and you hand them a budget and a schedule that's not realistic. As soon as the team realizes that they can't hit the goals go out the window and it's just a free for all. If you have a schedule that's not a real schedule that you really can't hit, then you're just modifying the schedule every month based on what's happening instead of now I sit down with the team before we start the project. We go through the schedule and the budget, and my question is this real? Can you hit it? And if not, let's change the budget. Let's change the schedule. Even if the client doesn't want to hear it, even if I don't want to hear it, I want to know, like, if this is not a real budget, if there's a cost code or an area where we're definitely going to go over, let's change the budget so that's your goal. Even if our profit drops, it still sets the PM and Site Super up to succeed and hit the budget that we've agreed to.
Yeah. So that's when I hear you saying this, that like really taps back into what the first thing that you said is use common sense, which is if you know that like getting that buy-in and agreement with your team at the front end and making sure that everybody's on the same page, just from a common sense point of view. If you got people who are going to build it, you want them to build it with a commitment to what that
Yeah.
number is. And if
Yeah.
that's not a realistic number, get real about the number.
Yeah.
I love that. And that's hard.
Yeah.
That's
It,
hard to do when we're
it's
like,
hard to do, but it's
this
better than
money, but yeah,
it's better than the alternative. And that goes back to, estimating and setting the intention with the client. The longer I'm doing this, the easier it is to look at the client and say, no, we're not going to. Oh, I know you want this to be a 6 months project, but it's 8, and that's it. And if you can't accept that, then change the scope or hire somebody else. So it starts with the sales process, and if you're not on point with your estimating and your agreements with the client, then you're setting the project up to fail. So that's a typical thing younger contractors do. They think they can hit these milestones, which they can't,
yeah.
and then they set the team up to fail.
Let me
So
ask you a question because part of what you're talking about is having what I refer to as hard conversations, like those difficult conversations with your team and being willing to hear and listen their perspective or the reality about how it is as opposed to how you wanted it to be or thought it could be. And then that conversation with that client, having that hard conversation to go, I know we said 6 months, but it's going to be 8 months. How have you gotten more comfortable with that? Because that's oftentimes where I see people really struggle, right? Is like that whole, I don't want to have the conversation. I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to disappoint people. I don't want to, it's like that. It's
well,
hard. So
you
how have you gotten comfortable with that?
you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? It's you get sick and tired of having those same conversations where you have an angry client, you're over budget, you're not hitting the schedule, and the company's burning money trying to make this client happy based on the promises you made. So I I don't enjoy being a contractor when we have set the project up to fail or given the client false hopes. Those are tough conversations that are really no fun, and that's the worst part about the business is having those clients that are really upset, and they're spending a lot of money with you, and to have a client that's not happy with your performance, it doesn't feel good, right? So
Yeah.
and there's a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety that comes with that. So it's easier to just have that conversation up front. And if the client doesn't agree or is not interested in what you're having to say, they're the wrong client. So the goal in sales is to get rid of those clients as soon as possible and move on to the clients that you will be successful with.
Um, is there, and maybe this is a good segue to this next conversation. Next question that I had is what are some of the bigger obstacles that you had to overcome along the way? Like, so maybe there's a connection to that. So how, because that's not easy to do, right? It's easy to say, well, maybe they're the wrong
No.
customer. But there's the having to balance what part's mine, what's parts theirs. And I hear you about hard conversations early and often save you a lot of heartache later on. Um, yeah, what were some of those bigger challenges for you that had
Um,
you come to the decision, I'm willing to have those hard conversations early and often?
yeah, I think we might need 10 hours for this one, but
All right,
um,
just give us like a few, like what
yeah.
are a couple that really like stick out to you that were like the
So
hard
the
challenge?
biggest the I think the biggest obstacles are creating and implementing systems and processes that work. Um, and it depends where the contractor comes from. If somebody's been working for a successful company for 20 years and they start their company, then they kind of come with all these built-in systems that they know work and
Mm-hmm.
work really well. For me, I kind of learned it all the hard way, and learning what an RFI is and how to use it. Like everybody knows what an RFI is, but how to use it properly. Everybody can build a schedule. How do you use it properly? Everybody can talk about it, cost to complete, but few people actually truly understand how to do a cost to complete in a way that gives you the information in time to make it change to the course of the project. Um, so the systems are one obstacle that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to get ingrained in the company. So when new people come on, you have these systems and you can train them quickly. Another big one is not accepting mediocrity from employees, especially site supers, PMs, estimators, and learning how to manage people is a huge, huge obstacle. Again, I never ran a company before, and I didn't have the management skills I have now when I started. Even 10 years ago, my company was actually bigger at one time at 54 employees, but I didn't have the management skills, and there was a lot of mediocrity in the company, and I didn't know how to go at it and get rid of the people that were not performing. There's a lot of people that talk about how great they are. There's few people that are actually that good in this industry. So that's
So
a
what
huge.
changed for you in your ability to be able to not accept mediocrity from people? What's the thing that gave you the confidence to, say no early or to let someone go early?
Well,
Um,
maybe it's less confidence and more understanding that they weren't so good. You hire somebody that have a great resume. I hired people that were better builders than I was that knew a lot more about the infrastructure and the process. So I thought, and I leaned on certain people to guide the company and step up. And that didn't happen. So again, it's an unwillingness to have mediocrity. And like, okay, this I'm never going to let this happen again inside of my company. And it's just a staunchness that this is not okay. I don't. This is not the type of work I want to do. I don't like having these hard conversations with clients on every job about being over budget and schedules slip and and not being respected out there is no fun as just another contractor that isn't that good. So
Yeah.
that's always driven me to be the contractor that people say, yeah, I worked with them and wow, they know their stuff. And that process of working with AGC was really successful.
Yeah, you make a really good point because when it comes down to it, and I know that the conversation that people have about your team is that they're really good and they're really skilled and that they like working with them, from subcontractors as well as, designers, architects, and so it requires getting the right people on the bus in the right seats and making sure that you don't necessarily take what somebody put on a piece of paper as face value. So that's part of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other part of it I hear you talking about is holding them accountable to results. So making sure that you have the systems and the processes in place. But
Mm-hmm.
also the other thing that I hear from you, Aaron, and I think this is something that, um, contractors as they're growing sometimes think, well, if I just find that right person, then they like sort of lob it over there, the accountability and the ownership of running their business, as you said, that
Yeah.
you really can't do. Like we can't abdicate the responsibility of ultimately running the business, that we have to be the ones to drive. And it's not to say we can't like tap into the brilliance of the people who work for us. I mean, ideally as a good leader, that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
But you also can't abdicate it. You can't just expect and assume that somebody else is gonna drive the ship. And that also goes back to what you said a second ago, which is that whole thing of you have a standard and a set of practices about how you do business that you make sure that everybody on the team is in alignment with. So it goes back to that systems and process thing that you have to decide what that is,
Mm-hmm.
and then hold people accountable to it.
Yeah. And I think it's also, seat time. It just, you got to do it over and over and over before you really learn how to do it well. And, this, what is it, the 10,000 hour rule? It's real. And, experience is, it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time to learn how to do these things and it doesn't come for free. Um, so it's having those experiences and you make a mistake on a certain job and like, okay, check, I learned that lesson. I'm
Yeah.
not going to do it again. And that comes down to common sense. When you make a mistake, you file it away and the next client that pulls that, whatever it is, you're ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
When a client's like, oh, you have to do this thing for free, uh, if you're running the job properly and you're on time and on budget and you're firing on all cylinders, client it's hard for a client to point fingers. So um, if your side of the street's clean, then you've got the ability to say no to a client when they are asking for something that may not be reasonable.
And your ability to be able to do that is requires you to be clear about where are you on your job, what did you
Yep.
do, what did you not do, what's the budget, what's in the contract, what's in the schedule. Like you're super clear about all those things before you can confidently go, here's what we agreed to, here's what we didn't, right? Like that
Yeah.
clarity makes a big difference. So
Yeah.
um if you were to choose, because this comes back to what you were saying about earlier about, having common sense and being relentless with the budget. And so I think there's a lot of good examples you've just given about sort of the common sense piece of it. If you were to give people, like, what are the top three most important things that a contractor can do to manage and control the budget, what are the top three things that you would advise them to do? What do you see are the top three most important things?
Well, estimate it properly to start with, right? You got to start by actually estimating it well. If you don't estimate it properly, you're starting on the wrong foot. So that's one.
Yeah.
Two, being clear with the team what the budget is, and the budget needs to be built in a way that can be easily referenced and clear, right? So a good example is, you can't just have a carpentry line item. You have to have framing and finish and cabinetry, and then making sure they understand each category and how much money they have in the budget, how many hours, and to transfer that to the team downstream. So that being clear with the team based on a good estimate is really critical. And then I'd say allowances are one place where contractors really fail in clarity and losing money. So if you don't manage your allowances properly, then you can't go back to the client and explain why they have to pay whatever they have to pay. Or it's if it's all lumped in together and you have to find receipts and try to figure out what was budget and what was allowance and what wasn't allowance, it becomes a real nightmare. So
Well, it comes down to job costing, well, right?
it does. It's more than, yeah, it's a little more than just job costing well, because you can job cost it, but if you can't say these hours were spent doing this, not this, and you can't prove it, then
Yeah.
then you lose faith with the client, and that can have an effect all the way down the line, because they look at you and they're like, they really don't cost code properly, and they're really not uh, clear on where the money's going. So now I don't trust them.
Mm-hmm.
So we've worked really hard on the allowances, and trying to convert allowances early is something that we've gotten really good at. Um, Going into a job with chock full of allowances is a recipe for disaster, and it takes twice the management that it would if those were converted to fixed cost early, if possible. So we work hard to convert those as soon as possible and be very clear with where the allowances are
That's
throughout the
awesome.
process.
Yeah, so rather than look at allowances sort of like as a slush fund, it can really burn you in the end.
Yeah.
And making sure it goes back to what you were saying earlier, like have that conversation early on, deal with it early on, so that
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't become this dragging thing that then can
Yeah.
eat up your profits, eat up your budget.
Yeah. And talking about change orders early is crucial. So when we do our meeting notes, we talk about change orders and then potential change orders, and we try to put dollar figures to that so they can see, like, this potential change order could be X, Y, or Z. And sometimes they'll say, "Oh my God, absolutely not." And then you're not spending time and you're not causing delay on potential change orders that nobody really wants anyway.
Yeah. So the three things I heard was be really clear in your estimating that your prices and your scope are correct, so that you're not missing things at the very first place where you start to lose money on a job, right? And estimating. The second thing I heard is your handoff process, making sure that your team that's actually going to execute on that work is clear about the number of hours and the scope, what's included, what's excluded, so that there's not, that disconnect happening, so that there's a congruence between how you bid it and how it actually gets built. And the third thing I heard is allowances, and making sure to stay on top of allowances so that it doesn't become one of those things where you have to eat it because you didn't you didn't deal with the pricing of it well at the front end.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Um, I know that there is another topic that is near and dear to your heart, which has to do with cost to complete. And Aaron and I are actually going to have another conversation. I'm going to be interviewing him again on this, and just the topic of how do you do cost to complete as a contractor to make sure that you're staying in front of the cost of that job, so that, and this is, you spoke to this a little while ago, Aaron, like if you're looking at it early on, you can see where you're headed well in advance of getting there, which is the idea behind doing cost to complete. So I'm really excited to have that conversation with you and dig deeper into it, because I am totally on the same page with you that if you can do that well and do it consistently, it cuts down on the number of surprises, bad things that happen, losing money. It allows you to have those conversations earlier on with your team, with your clients. So we'll dig into that next time. And before I let you go, and thank you so much for being here, is there anything else that you would add? Anything else that you would share with people as a best practice as they're on their journey of growing their contracting business that you found was helpful learning for you, in addition to what you've already shared in terms of process and team?
Yeah. One of the hardest things to do is pass on bad work when your pipeline's uh, low, right? So if your pipeline is if you're not feeling comfortable about the pipeline and you go out and you're trying to sell work, it's difficult to sell work at the price that you really want to, and it's difficult to look somebody in the eye and say, no, we can't do that. That's not possible. Um, and just being firm in knowing that the next job's going to come and it's all going to be okay. That's a hard thing to do. Even 22 years later, where I have less of that because our pipeline's pretty packed, and we've got a pretty good network of projects that come in regularly. So it's a different thing. 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were taking on projects that you know weren't the cream of the crop projects, but as a young contractor, they kind of have to, right? You've got to sometimes take the work where it comes. But not being afraid to have hard conversations when you really need the job is tricky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will go back and just add to what you just said, which is the first part of this conversation is use common sense. If you're taking on a job that has a lot of risk where you're not making any money, you have to ask yourself the question, so first of all, and it comes back to knowing your numbers, knowing, what it's really going to cost you, knowing your overhead break even percentage, but like being super clear about that before you say, well, we'll do it for less. Because what I've seen people do is sometimes you're writing a check to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
Can you really afford to do that? I mean, sometimes people are going to, you can make a decision in business if you know it's a downtime or you have a slow time and you go, I'm willing to break even on that job and cover my overhead because I want to keep my guys working. But you got to be really careful about doing that, and careful about taking work that, as you say, is not really your ideal client or the right client, because sometimes that can actually cost you more money, right? Like a client that's not a good client that is going to ask for the world because you overpromised at the beginning of the job, maybe, or they're just not a good fit for you. So it comes back to what you were talking about earlier, that ability to be able to have those difficult conversations early. And I will just add, I think a lot of what we're talking about today is that whole thing of the clearer you are about what does it really cost, what's the scope, what's included, what's not included, the more confidence you have in being able to have those conversations. Where do I stand with that job? What's the reality of that job? That's much easier to do when we're really grounded with that clarity than it is if we're just, hustling and running as fast as we can and hoping that it all turns out. So, and that again comes back to what you were talking about systems process. Do I have those things in place? Thank you. This has been great.
My pleasure.
Any final thoughts to add? Otherwise, we will see you next time when we talk about cost to complete.
Yeah, that'll be a fun one.
All right. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Aaron.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for being here on the Profit Builder today. Glad we got an opportunity to talk with Aaron. Hope you got something out of this. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the Profit Builder. Thanks.